Hi everyone, we are here tonight. I'm Emma Cowling, let me say first, for those of you who don't know me. We're here tonight for the Why Don't We Talk About It panel on Asperger's and autism. I am joined by Rob Wilmot, Natalie Naudo and Lauren Nicholas, and we are going to be talking about autism and understanding better what it's like to live with autism, either having it yourself or with family members and people close to you. So these lovely people have agreed to share some of their experiences. Now, my reason for picking this particular topic for this week, this month, is that I know I've worked with people who are autistic, and I know that at times I have been probably a bit more brusque with them than I've needed to, and I've maybe not made the experience as good for them as possible because I haven't understood where they're coming from. I've just dismissed what's going on. And I think it's really important that we take the time out to just understand what's happening for other people before we make judgments, decide what's best for them, and all those other things we do, especially when we're managing people or when we're working in a team with other people. So that's kind of my motivation. I think it's really important to also be able to feel like we can ask people about it and talk about it. So that's hence why we've got the Why Don't We Talk About It theme. So I'm going to now ask our lovely panel to just introduce themselves. And I was going to go actually to Natalie first and ask her to introduce herself and tell us a bit about, Natalie, what's your connection with autism?
Yeah, thank you, Emma, and good evening. Yeah, I'm Natalie Naudo. I work in technology. I work for a technology company called Logitech. And I sit in the kind of the video collaboration side of the business, looking at channel and communication and distribution. My connection with autism and the reason I am fairly passionate about this particular topic is my son was diagnosed with autism officially when he was 6. We have only just got our plan approved and he's 10 years old. So over the last 4 years, I've had that journey that a lot of parents go through and trying to get what's rightfully his and the support that he needs. And for me, I've persevered with that journey to ensure that he's able to see and show his strengths in the way that he should be able to through the support that he needs for education. And that may be one-to-one, that may be extra time, that's to really support on how he learns and educates. I also champion and sit on a number of committees within kind of the technology space, particularly around diversity. And as a female, diversity starts with women. But for me, sitting on certain committees, mine is more neurodiversity that I champion, as well as the gender equality piece. So hopefully that's as enough of a kind of a summary as to kind of why I'm here today.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Natalie. Lauren, do you want to go next and tell us about you?
Yeah, thanks so much. So I'm Lauren. My connection to the topic is that I am autistic. I'm 28 now, diagnosed almost exactly a year ago today. So good timing. That has been a bit of a roller coaster, kind of finding out at that point in my life. I work in the education sector in a data type role and worked in kind of data and technology roles up until this point. That'll do for now.
Thank you, Lauren. And Rob, tell us about you.
So I'm a father of an autistic daughter. It took 6 years to get her diagnosed through the NHS, so I empathise with your story. And it was very traumatic for her because she went through a whole period of also having social anxiety, agoraphobia, anorexia, and she's only just getting onto an even keel now with a balance of drugs and therapy and being looked after. So it's been hard, and now I'm a single dad with her because she's 19 years old, but she isn't 19 years old because she's immature. I was diagnosed with autism last year, formally. So I'm 51 this year. So finding out you're autistic at 51 is interesting. But I did it purely to show my daughter that autism doesn't have to hold you back, because even at school, you get treated as somebody with special needs, and Grace may have needs, but she's fluent in Korean. She can draw, paint, articulate, win in arguments. She just doesn't know how to consistently interact with neurotypical people. So just to summarize, for me then, I've been in business for many years. So I got a job. I realized quite quickly, for some reason, that I was unemployable. So since getting quite fortunate in a massive tech company in the late 90s that allowed me to leave with a lot of money, I've built my own companies over the last 25 years now. I sold my last company 2 years ago to a big Silicon Valley-based entity, which now has allowed me to focus on angel investment and seed investment in companies. And everyone who invests has an investment thesis, and my investment thesis is invest in underrepresented people, be it age, be it neurodiversity, and I've invested in quite a few neurodiverse people, including a company called Mindful, which is run by an NHS doctor who is bipolar and has been through 10 years of complete hell getting to where he is now. So he's created a mental health app to help other people to manage their mental well-being and make them more mentally resilient. So I'm an investor. I'm a dad. I'm autistic. So is my daughter. And I'm grateful to be here, Emma. So I'm a bit rambly, but there you go.
Thanks, Rob. And before we carry on, I would just want to say, for those that are watching, hi, for those that have just joined us, you're welcome to ask questions as we go along, but we won't necessarily answer them straight away. We will try and, if it's relevant to the discussions that we're having, we'll integrate them and build that in. And I've asked everyone to kind of look out for those questions. But many of these questions have been submitted in advance, and we want to encourage that to happen. So we will, if we've got time, come back to some of the questions. Or if they don't get answered, then we'll pick them up afterwards. So feel free to drop them in there, but don't expect that we will always get to them, I suppose is what I'm saying there. And if you're watching on replay, again, feel free to drop some questions in there and we'll do what we can to find answers to them anyway. So thank you. Hope you enjoy it. So I'm going to go to Lauren first of all and just ask, and the reason for this question. So I'm going to ask, what's the difference between Asperger's and autism? Now, the reason for this question is because I really didn't know. And this is something that when I started setting this panel up, I was like, do I call it Asperger's? Do I call it autism? What do I come across both of them? How do they differ? How are they the same? And I had this conversation with both Rob and Lauren. So I thought it was really useful just to clear that up to start with. So Lauren, what would you like to say about this?
Yeah, I guess the short answer from me is that there isn't one. So Asperger's isn't, I don't think, diagnosed formally anymore. It is what would have been referred to as kind of high functioning autism, which is also not necessarily diagnosed anymore. Now things tend to get diagnosed just as autism spectrum disorder. Everyone is on a spectrum and that goes out in all sorts of different dimensions. It's not just kind of linear. But yeah, there's been a kind of step away from like the subdivisions of autism, I think, and kind of putting those categories on people. So yeah, the short answer is that they are both autism.
And now generally people talk about autism rather than Asperger's, and that's the thing. But that's a shift that I wasn't aware of even when I started looking at it, and things are moving all the time, aren't they? So yeah.
I do. Can I add a bit to that? Yeah. So it has caused a little bit of confusion though, because a great advocate of Asperger's was Temple Grandin, who is an amazing role model for kids with autism. And she got autism at a very early age, but she became one of the best engineers in America and is a professor. Autistic second, engineering first, which is pretty amazing. And she was talking about the fact that the reclassification of ASD or autistic spectrum disorder has created a a difficulty for people who are reasonably high functioning, because, so for instance, here we go. So I had a heart attack about 2 years ago, and I was rushed to hospital, and they were chatting to me after I'd recovered, and the nurse went and read my notes, and because I was going through diagnosis of autistic spectrum disorder, she came back to me and started talking to me like a child, because she said, "Oh, you've got learning difficulties," because that's immediately equated with your autism. And what's happened now is, so my dad spent the last 10 years of his career working with severely autistic kids and young adults, and there is a very, very broad spectrum. So you can have people who are dysfunctional with it and self-harming with it, and non-communicative with it, and then you've got people at the other end that are basically seen as very intelligent, very clever, but they are considered socially inept. And so you've got that whole spectrum, and I think it has caused a bit of difficulty in terms of how people are functioning and how they're seen to function. So I think it hasn't all been positive, just creating ASD. And the other thing it's allowed is even many of my friends, and I have to bite my lip, they all say, "Oh, everybody's a bit autistic then. Everybody's on the spectrum." And it creates a difficulty in how people interact with people with autism, ASD, or Asperger's. So it's created a bit of a difficulty.
And it's that confusion of what are we talking about here when it's such a big label? Then
it is. Yeah.
What does it actually mean for the individual? And that's kind of one of another reason for setting this up is because it's from what I've just learned from talking to the three of you and some other friends as well, it's that it's very, very individual about how it plays out for us.
Totally.
And this kind of leads me on to the next question, which is, so one example of how an autistic person might experience the world differently to someone who's neurotypical. And particularly in this, I know it's like from your experience, from what you know about, and I'm guessing that you're probably all going to come up with something slightly different in this. So I was going to ask, Rob, let's go to you again.
So it's interesting because I was always seen as a very naughty child, and looking back, you were diagnosed as special back then rather than having autism or whatever. And I was a very difficult child. And it turned out that I also had this, I can't remember the name of it, but numbers just I couldn't see numbers properly. So I got very frustrated with that. Loud noises made me go absolutely crazy. People eating, I could hear them eating, made me go absolutely crazy. People trying to talk to me, it felt like they were trying to hoodwink me all the time. I couldn't understand what they were trying to achieve. So there are many different sensory issues, there are many different behavioural issues, many different interpretive issues about how people speak to you. And do we get on to how that's coped with later, or do we talk about that together now?
Do we talk about it, how you cope with it? That's useful to know.
Yes. So I'm sure I won't do too much more talking, but over the last 51 years, because I didn't know what autism was, I've simply had to cope with every situation that's come along. And essentially, it's my daughter taught me this one, masking, which is basically to analyze how other people do things, and then do method acting. So essentially, you become a method actor. Mm-hmm. So I was completely and utterly horrified at public speaking. So at university, I had to do a public speaking module. I nearly left the course because I didn't want to do it. But on the other side of that, in 2016, I stood on a stage and did a TEDx talk in Krakow in front of 5,000 people. But I did it in the style of. So it wasn't me, it was me looking at the 10 best TED Talks and analysing the different methodologies and coming up with a tempo, a gradient of voice, a map for it in order to stand on that red dot and do a performance. And that's what we do as autistic people, or many do, to deal with the world. But it can be quite exhausting because even I was doing something today on a call, having to do lots of speaking. After it, I had to go and lie down for 10 minutes because my brain having to be constant acting and interpretation mode rather than just being able to talk. It's incredibly exhausting. So there's the masking, there's the acting, there's the interpretation, and there's delivering a role. And that's how I've dealt with it, and to some extent, my daughter deals with it when she's in her VR environments as a avatar.
Yeah.
So so I'll shut up now because I'm sure there's lots of other good stuff to be said.
I'm going to ask Lauren to follow up on that because I know that's something you've talked about as well as the masking. But tell us about how you experience the world first, Lauren.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to touch on the masking point because Rob's talking about the presenting one kind of struck a chord with me because I found very consistently through my career, I get the feedback that I'm very confident and I know what I'm talking about, and I'm good at presenting. And if only they could see what was going on inside my head, no one would ever believe a word I said because it's a completely different story and you just get so good at fitting in and looking the part. And it is exhausting. And for me, that was a huge revelation that was actually the thing that finally made it click. Oh yeah, autism. Once I started to look up things about masking and seeing other women talk about how they felt in that same situation. And it sort of made everything click into place as to why I had been in this constant cycle of huge amounts of anxiety and burning out because I was forcing myself into those situations constantly, not realizing the impact it was having, not realizing how if you in your brain are trying to work out, okay, what does that facial expression mean? When do I look that person in the eye? Have I practiced this sentence in my head enough? What's going on? I don't understand. If you're having to do all of that manually on top of just existing generally in the world, it takes up a huge amount of energy and it's so draining. And I definitely relate to the having to go and lie down after a long meeting. I've got to interview a load of people on Tuesday and I'm already dreading it. I've cleared my evening because I know I'm not going to be able to speak or do anything afterwards. I think.
Can I just, Lauren, before you carry on, I just want to pick up on that a little bit because it's very easy for me, non-autistic, without the experience, to listen to what you're saying and kind of go, yeah, well, but I struggle with presentations too. I get scared of this, and I know a lot of people do. But actually, what I want to draw out is what you're saying is that sensory overload or the sensory thing, all the different things that you're doing. So it's like the fear that we have of presenting and standing up in front of people, and then throw a load of extra stuff on top of that and then start to understand the world that you're in. And I think that's really important to draw out rather than, because in the past I might have just dismissed that and gone, yeah, whatever. But actually, no, there's this extra sensory stuff happening.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is that I'm not just talking about presentations, I'm talking about every single interaction I have every moment of the day. One thing I discovered after my diagnosis is that I was doing it when I was by myself as well, which was the most bizarre thing. I realized that I was kind of not reacting to sensory stuff in the way that my kind of body needed me to. And I was sort of almost imagining like there was someone else that might kind of spot that my face was doing the wrong thing or something. And realizing that and cutting that out has been a huge energy saving. But yeah, presenting is a good example because it's quite a visible one, but it's not just limited to that. It's literally every conversation you ever have. And that's where it kind of just adds up. And it's, just kind of learning to manage your energy expenditure and making that kind of conscious decision that's made a huge difference to me. I guess, the other difference is a huge one, as Rob said, as you said, is the kind of sensory overload. Again, that's something I really underestimated before my diagnosis. It's sort of all of those inputs kind of build up and up and up. I'd read somewhere that in kind of neurotypical brain, because obviously everyone is being overloaded with sensory input all of the time. In a neurotypical brain, that most of that gets flagged as like, this doesn't matter, zone that out, just focus on what's in front of you. But in the brain of someone who is autistic, that doesn't happen so much, and it's like all of it's like dialed up and you can't quite tune out which are the important things. So again, it's like you're having to kind of battle through that in those everyday situations as well, and kind of learning to balance that out and take some of that away where you can has been hugely beneficial. I now work from home full time, for example, which has made a massive difference, because not having to deal with kind of bright office lights and people talking and eating and moving around you unpredictably has a huge difference. And then I think that I think about autism in terms of like the social stuff, the sensory stuff, and then the routine stuff. And the routine side for me, I guess one big difference in how I'd experience something, a good example might be how I'd react to a change. So a last minute change of plans with friends or meeting or whatever it might be. It's sort of, I mean, lots of people don't like change, I guess, but for me, if someone suggests like, oh, let's do this a half hour later, or let's do it tomorrow instead, or whatever, it's like this sudden like tidal wave of panic just suddenly washes over. And it's like, I will not think about anything else until I've been able to like sit and stop and kind of reprocess like every moment that's going to lead up until that point, and reprocess the whole plan. And it's sort of learning to, explaining that to kind of friends, co-workers and things like that can help, because there are things that you can do to make that easier. And there are things that people can do to kind of avoid having to change things quite so much for you. But yeah, I just wanted to touch on that point, so I talked about the other two kind of angles already.
Cool, thank you. And Natalie, how about, what have you seen and what have you experienced from your son's experience and as well?
Yeah, and it's different, because obviously I've not got autism myself, but I am a mother to a son who is. So he's experiencing how to cope with the situations that he's in, with the sensory overload. Routine is a big part of what we have to do, and if there are changes, it has to be a planned change, and he has to be aware of the change. But and if there are sudden changes, then I need to give him the tools that he needs to be able to cope with it, because it's going to get even more obvious when he grows up and in adulthood. Certainly social, emotional and communication are three areas that we have to focus on quite considerably, which is all part of autism and the diagnosis, right? And it's really, for me at the moment, it's just about coping. How can he cope, and what tools I can give him to be able to do that, and continue that over his journey between now and when he goes it alone, really. And all I can do is support. All I can do is support and give him those guides to hopefully, kind of unravel that, so it's not so exhausting when he grows up. And I think for me, especially in the work environment, social events are a constant part of my day to day. And if I put myself in my son's shoes and put myself in that situation, how hard is it to be a room full of people and socializing and thinking that actually I don't want to socialize just because it's just too much. I can't cope with it. So I guess I'm just trying to help him as best as I can and guide him in the way I think I should guide him. I think for me, a lot of, I'm part of the National Autistic Society, so I actually take a lot of learns from them and communities to see how, because I've not got the answers for everything, but there are great examples of how to do that. And I'm constantly learning. I don't know it all, but the more I learn, the more I can kind of educate him, and educate others is a big thing. If the more you educate externally, the easier it will be. And I'm hoping that with all of the stuff that everybody is doing around education, by the time he gets to the working environment, it will be a lot easier, right? It will be a lot easier, but it's that journey of education constantly, and not giving up, so that it can become easier for him.
Yeah, and that's such a big, if we can change the work environment to accommodate people better, so that they don't have to go and socialize in order to get ahead in their career, and there's other ways of kind of doing and recognizing that's just one small thing, but it's just massive. So Lauren, I'm going to come back to you now on this and ask, so do men and women tend to experience autism in a similar way?
I can only speak for women, I guess, really. But one thing I want to say on this is that like the core symptoms, men and women autism, exactly the same, all the routine stuff, the sensory stuff, the social stuff. The difference seems to be mainly in the prevalence of masking that we were talking about. So men and women do both mask, and it kind of comes up more or less in different groups, but it seems to be there is a higher prevalence of that amongst girls. And we've already talked a bit about that, but that's like kind of doing those interactions very manually, rehearsing conversations, covering up your autistic traits in order to fit in. And there's various kind of reasons for why that might be, kind of expectations on girls in society. There may be genetic components we don't really know, as far as I'm aware. But the impact of that is that there does seem to be a kind of underdiagnosis of women. So historically, it was thought, I can't remember the numbers now, but it was thought there were loads more autistic men than women. But actually, as time's gone on, that ratio is getting narrower, because more and more girls and women are being diagnosed. And I think because of that, I guess because some of that is hidden, it is underdiagnosed, it's not as visible, and it has all of those negative consequences we were talking about, of the kind of exhaustion. On top of that, kind of a bit of loss of identity, if you're kind of masking to fit into the world, like which bits are really you, which bits are what everyone around you kind of expects you to be. And I've certainly felt that shift since my diagnosis of kind of, actually, I feel a lot more myself now than I ever did before. But what was I going to say? Yeah, I think that the part of the reason that it's got there is that the assessments and the research around autism was originally kind of done on men and boys, and the tests were validated on men and boys, which means that if there are those differences in how girls tend to present, then they are going to be systematically missed. And until you kind of shift, and there definitely is a shift now, I think, like in the professional world, kind of clinical psychologists, etc., and people that know about autism, but in the general public, I don't think you're not going to get that shift properly until you start to show people what autism looks like, for want of a better phrase, because the people that pick it up first are not clinical psychologists, they're not professionals, they're going to be parents, they're going to be teachers, they're going to be family friends. And so until you shift kind of that image of what it looks like, and maybe show more autistic women, or just generally more people that are autistic that mask a lot, it's not only women, it's other groups as well, of course, then you aren't going to see that shift.
And Rob, do you want to add anything into that? Because I guess you're seeing the difference in terms of yourself and Grace. Do you see differences in the way Grace?
We are more similar than we are different. And it's quite funny when we sit in a room. It's quite hilarious. If somebody comes and observes us, everything's done with a nod or a smile or a whatever, because we know each other's foibles. But she found it incredibly difficult because girls can be really bitchy. Girls can be very cliquey and bitchy, and boys are a bit more over and just get on with stuff. Girls can be very nasty to each other. And Grace found it very difficult to fit in with cliques of girls that basically were like the mean girls. And she had difficulty understanding. So masking, was she going to be in with the mean cool girls, or was she going to be the geeky kid? And she flipped between the two, and she got into a lot of trouble because of that. To some point, she became a school refuser and wouldn't go to school anymore because she couldn't cope with how am I supposed to act with my peer group. And it was only 3 years ago that I managed to get her into an online school that catered for autistic girls, called Interhigh, which is quite popular now. And many of my friends who've got autistic daughters, it's amazing how many come out of the woodwork when you say you've got one. They all now go to that school or have been to that school. So girls are better at masking, which is why it's harder to find it in girls. I think it's the same in each. I do think it's common between both sexes, but women are much better at fitting in because societally they've had to do it. They've had to, fit into a template from stereotypes from years ago. But now it's becoming more egalitarian. I suppose it's being spotted more, but thank God that you know, there's counselling and care for girls now like that. I mean, it took me years to get Grace through because, again, they just thought she was a naughty kid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm going to move on. And this is a question that was asked, and I know none of you are qualified medically, but I just, how do we know? Have we got any thoughts on how accurate the test is for autism? And can someone be negative on the test but still be autistic? And I guess the masking stuff plays into this quite strongly.
Yeah, I think so. I think, yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. I think once you got to the point of a kind of, you know, clinical diagnosis with a clinical psychologist, probably you're going to be fine. If we're talking kind of the online tests, they're a little bit dodgy, I would say. Like, to be fair, I do tend to come out as autistic on them still, but there, you know, there's questions in there like, do you tend to get obsessed with train timetables and things like that? And I mean, no, I don't. But I mean, some autistic people do, I'm sure, but that's not really the point. It's kind of, you know, they're trying to ask around, you know, restrictive interests or special interests, or however you want to call it, and that will be different for everyone. I think there's some stereotypes still kind of quite built into some of those first pass kind of online tests. But yes, certainly the kind of masking issue that we talked about kind of plays into that. So probably the short answer is yes, if you're using those online tests, but they're going to be of varying quality. And I think I would certainly, for me, I'd done loads of those tests in the past and always come out as autistic. I never thought to get a diagnosis, or never really internalized that until I went and listened to, watched videos of women talking about their experiences and how that felt different for them. And all of a sudden the penny dropped. I was like, oh, okay, they look like me. I get it now. So yeah, it's definitely not the be all and end all, but as you say, we're not doctors.
Yeah. So moving on. So what are the benefits of being autistic? And I remember seeing a tweet from Rob not long after he'd been diagnosed, which said something along the lines of, someone asked me what my life would be like, or what I'd have done, what I think how much better my life would be if I'd not been autistic. And that's just the wrong answer. And so, yeah, Rob, I'm going to come to you because it came from that tweet to some extent.
It was quite funny. And this is the issue with Asperger, with the declassification of Asperger's. So just like that mental health professional who said, they spoke to me like a child because I had special needs, everybody immediately assumes if you have autism, you are disabled, you've been held back. To some extent you are, but one thing that really worked was the Big Bang Theory and Sheldon Cooper. I mean, that was a liberating thing for people. That guy, you know, fictionally got a Nobel Prize. But the fact is that it's not held me back at all. It's been bloody hard work. I was unemployable because I had my own way of doing things. And luckily, my own way of doing things made lots of people billions and millions of pounds. Wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been autistic, I don't think. But money's not everything. Equally, I wouldn't be a painter if I wasn't autistic, because my painting became my internalized therapy to cope with clouding everything out. So I became Cervantes as a kid at painting. And you know, I gave up the painting to be a technologist and get into being a coder and a techie, but I've now gone back to painting, and I will be exhibiting again because it's been a superpower. I did actually put in the tweet, I answered it's been my superpower rather than a disability, which is again the reason I got diagnosed, because I won't go into too much detail about it, but my partner at the time actually held Grace back because she had special needs, she was autistic. And as I said, I simply got diagnosed. I could have got on without it, to show Grace that it isn't a disability. It's actually another way of living that is just to get shit done, if I can say that, and just to take advantage of those things. You know, I think, Lauren, you're a data scientist, aren't you?
Yeah, data analyst, yeah.
Data analyst, there you go. Bloody great with spotting patterns and numbers. I mean, you know, there are so many brilliant examples of autistic people who are making massive impacts in society as scientists, as analysts, as doctors, as we're in all walks. Some of the best surgeons are autistic because they are hyper-focused. Mm-hmm. So it's a superpower. It's not a disability. If you're autistic and you are right at the bottom of the spectrum, it's a massive disability. Mm-hmm. If you are one of those people who has massive mental trauma that is also manifests as autism, you're never going to be able to function in society. But at the higher level of the autistic spectrum, at the top end, there's no limits to what you can achieve.
It's funny you say that, because for me as a mother, I'll work out what his superpowers are, right? And you know, we can identify certain things. He's a very logical thinker, right? So does that mean he's going to excel in engineering and science and mathematics because of the way he thinks? And also that's less reliant on kind of that social interaction as a role and as a job. He thinks in a very visual way, and he's got an absolute extraordinary memory. So how can I look at all the things that he's absolutely super strong on and use that to uncover what he can do? And it's about looking at things that I can do as he grows up. It's not going to be a football match. It's not going to be a rugby game. It's going to be things that potentially are not widely seen in kids. So he does coding, right? We're doing coding, art, because he draws. He's quite visual. He expresses himself through drawing and art. So it's looking at things like that at a young age and trying to bring out that he has got all of these great superpowers, and I support that, so that he is, when he's in adulthood, knows that those powers are, you know, are there and a strength. My son is he's very confident. He's a very positive individual. And when he knows he's done something good, he says, I'm the best at it. So I have to kind of take that out, because that will help with his mental health, to know that actually he's really good at this, and to really play on that, because it's all around the positivity. There are many things I could list about him that are benefits to autism that I see in him. But yeah, there are a few that I kind of see really helping me shape his future for him and with him.
So on that, there's you just reminded me, there's a book called I think it's A Boy Made of Blocks, and it's about an autistic child who discovers Minecraft. But it's told a lot from his father's perspective, and how, because when he's in the Minecraft world, it's his world, he's creating, he has control, and then his father goes in and joins him, and he gets to sort of make him do things in particular ways. He just becomes this complete Minecraft whiz.
Yeah.
And I think it's based on a true story as well, but it's a really powerful kind of example of how give an autistic child their own world, or an autistic person their own world to be in, where you can define the rules. Then what rules come out? What are the things that how would you create the world? Yeah. Lauren, how about you? What are your benefits that you've seen?
I was going to say, I think my parents were unknowingly doing what you were doing, Natalie, because I used to. They both did a lot of maths in their careers, and they used to like bribe me with simultaneous equations when I was little, to kind of encourage, because I absolutely was obsessed with maths, and which they thought was totally normal. And looking back, I'm like, how did you not know? But I could have spent all day, every day, just doing sums, I think. But yeah, and I think that was kind of nurturing that, whatever that innate kind of logical, mathematical, whatever thing was, and now, lo and behold, that is now my job. Yeah, I think there's lots of benefits. Like now that I have the diagnosis, I can kind of look back and think, actually, all the things that I'm really, really good at, I'm really good at them because I'm autistic. I think some of that kind of routine and like need for structure and predictability has made me really good at being able to kind of systematize and make things logical and communicate clearly, because I kind of have to have things make sense and fit together. And that's something I kind of good at problem solving in the workplace in a way that some people, like sometimes people don't see the same solutions, because I'm just, I kind of have to have things fit in a certain way. I think kind of socially, obviously there are difficulties and some of the things are quite exhausting, but I think some of the positives of quite manually doing that interaction can be that, I am very observant. I tend to notice the kind of, relationships between people, or when something's not quite right, because I'm consciously trying to figure it out all of the time. I think even some of the sensory stuff, obviously there's lots of negative sides to being kind of overwhelmed, etc. If you're in your own environment and you're able to control that, being very sensitive means that, yes, lots of things are quite unpleasant, but then there's also other things that are going to be really nice. There's certain smells or tastes or whatever that for me are probably more like disproportionately kind of comforting or reassuring to me than they might be to a neurotypical person, because I'm that much more sensitive or whatever. And so you can kind of start to use some of that to balance out some of the kind of overwhelming negative with some of the positives, once you know the things that kind of help you.
That's really interesting. I haven't thought about that before either. So yeah, wow. You can just, the experience that you're getting, if you can be in a place where you can just enjoy it, then what new insights are you going to be able to would you be able to give about the world just from just sitting there and being there and just interesting, that whole strand that I'm not going to get diverted on. So Lauren, I'm going to continue with you and ask, based on what we've talked about and what, especially what you're sharing about the way you experience things and the things you need in place, are there things that people around you can do or avoid doing to get the best out of you so that these superpowers can come out?
I mean, yes, probably loads. I think so. I can say someone specific to me, but I guess in like general terms, kind of for working with autistic people, being friends with autistic people, the number one thing I would say is just ask. Kind of, I'm constantly learning new things, and it might be different depending on my mood or the situation I'm in, and just having some curiosity and asking what someone needs and being open to that is probably the most helpful. I guess also not assuming that what you see is what you get. The whole conversation we've had around masking, one of the reasons that I wanted to get a diagnosis was so that it would help me explain to workplaces, for example, that, yes, I might look fine, but there's other stuff going on and it's not that straightforward, and I do need some support and I do need some adjustments. And also, I guess related to that, don't underestimate the impact of some small things can have. Kind of generally, if I've got to the point of kind of asking someone to make an adjustment, it's because it really matters. And sometimes it might sound really tiny, but if someone is asking you because of their diagnosis or whatever it might be, and maybe this is just general being a nice human being advice as well, but take it seriously, because it probably has more of an impact than you might assume. I guess, I mean, for me at work, a lot of it revolves around knowing what to expect is probably the biggest one, and kind of people giving me advance notice of what's going to be in a meeting or how it's going to run or who I'm going to be in a group with or whatever. And people have got used to now me asking lots of questions up front, and it might take them an extra 2 minutes of their day, but it could take hours or days of me trying to run over what's going to happen in that workshop out of my life, which is great, and I think worth the trade-off. I don't know, I might, have my camera off during meetings, kind of people understanding that is because then I don't have to manually make my face work for the whole day. And that saves a lot of energy, rather than saying, oh, Lauren, why don't you have your camera on? Again, makes a huge difference. So just having a bit of curiosity and a bit of understanding that some of those small things will make a really big difference. And just, asking whoever the person is that you're talking about, what it is in that moment that you could do to help.
And asking from a genuine perspective, like, I'm curious, rather than asking, why aren't you doing this? It's kind of
I'm
recognizing there's something here. But it's easy to feel like asking is the wrong thing. But if you're asking from a curiosity perspective, then that comes out, doesn't it? It's not being rude. It's just sort of saying, look, I'm intrigued. I want to understand. And I think when people ask from that perspective, you get a lot more.
Yeah, definitely. I would much rather people ask me 100 questions and because they didn't understand, rather than say nothing and then nothing changes. I think that's definitely better.
Well, it's funny actually, because there was a couple of things that I pulled out from this question, and the first thing is take time to listen, which I think is the same thing that basically what you're saying is, because you can ask the question and not listen to the answer. Many people do that. So it's actually take the time to listen and listen to what you're actually saying, not just ask the question because you have to. And the other area for sure is say what you mean. My son is a very literal thinker. So you just have to say it how it is, and don't try and dress it up. He's not very good with that. He's not very good with things that don't make sense. He's very literal. So say what you mean, because I think that'll go a long way. And then I suppose the other thing is patience. I think patience is for sure. If you ask a question, wait for an answer, wait for a response. But it might take a little bit longer to kind of answer that in the way that you would like it to be answered, just to digest it, really.
What I'm hearing is the slowing down and being willing to go, I don't know your world well enough to make a judgment here. I need to find out from you first and find out what's going on for you.
The saying how it is difficult for people though, because so I've owned and run and been a CEO of a number of companies, and it does take people a lot of time to realise that they don't have to do the whole greasy pole waffle, climbing the greasy pole with you. You need to say, this is what the numbers are, this is why the numbers are this way, and this is what I'm going to do about it. Or this is why we haven't hired, or this is why I haven't finished coding, or can I do it this way? Rather than dressing it up in a way that is to be presented to somebody who is politically minded and politically motivated, who's and working in. So I've also worked in government as a senior civil servant on missions. I won't go into all the detail, but I was a senior civil servant in technology for 2 years as a part-time job in the cabinet office. And ministers and permanent secretaries and senior executives found it incredibly difficult when I would walk into a meeting and say, don't want excuses, I want to know how it is because I need to fix this. And the first instinct would be to cover their ass first, then release data in the slowest, most obfuscated way possible in order to basically try to play to your agenda, because they're used to working in those sort of delivering news in different ways and shaping budgets in different ways. And all you want to know is what needs to be fixed. Just tell me what's wrong, what have you done, and how do we make it better? So you're right about the say it how it is. I get so frustrated and find it very difficult to mask when somebody bullshits. It's just, I will not tolerate it, and I won't deliver it, so I don't expect it, which is why I'm really rubbish at being an employee, because it seems to be something that is shaped into all walks of working, unfortunately. But yes.
And did it, so in your companies, Rob, did you manage to keep it out of them, or did it still kind of creep back in?
Oh, just say, for instance, salespeople are the most devious, obfuscating, nasty bunch of people they can be, because they're taught to be competitive and aggressive and compete with each other, because that's how salespeople are bred in the UK and in the US, to fight against each other to get to the top, therefore sell more for the company. And I used to sit them down and say, this is how we're going to do it. This is our honesty policy. You can't sell rubbish to clients. You can't blag clients. You can't blag the tech team. You can't sell something and then get the tech team to build it for you because you can't sell what you've got. And that helped the tech team because they were used to being fed a load of crap from the top that they had to do because somebody had sold something that wasn't quite how the software worked. So the tech team loved it because they probably all were autistic, but certainly one of them was. But the situation is, saying how it is has more benefits than negatives. Unfortunately, society isn't wired that way because of the pseudo politics with a little p that everybody plays in order to climb the greasy pole and stay at the top of it. That's just a manifesto for change. I'll write a book about it one day.
Well, and
start now.
You talk about that in the authentic visibility group, and that's completely what part of my thing as well. It's about showing up as ourselves and being honest, because it's only from when you
I'm being vulnerable.
where you are.
Yeah, but also being vulnerable. You've got to be able to show your vulnerabilities in order to be a team player. Ironically, I can be a better team player than a lot of people who are neurotypical because I am.
Yeah.
And it's because I've learned to be, because I can't be bothered masking, and I need the honesty to get through the day, certainly in business.
Yeah. So moving on, what's the best, and this follows on a bit, what's the best way for someone to be an ally in a workplace situation? And Natalie, I'm going to come to you first, because I know you've kind of been involved in quite a lot of diversity groups and things like that, so probably been involved in some of those discussions too. So what are your thoughts on this?
So I guess my thoughts are in kind of a two-pronged approach, I think. Certainly education and educate yourself is the biggest ally, because if you educate yourself, then you can understand those around you, those in your team, those that report into you, those colleagues and peers, that you can really truly understand what it means to be autistic. And we talk about that a lot in our groups. You know, how can we educate ourselves? How can we educate the community? How can we educate staff? And that is, you know, we can share that, but it's down to you as an individual to make sure that you are learning. And I think we were championed for managers to ensure that they went through some level of training on neurodiversity and autism, so that they can understand how to manage a team and individuals in a team, because it's not one size fits all, and you can't do that as a manager. You have to adapt to the people that you are managing. So for sure, education is a big part of it, but also calling out discrimination when you witness it and when you see it. And those are the two big things for me. And if you see it, you know what to do and how to call it out. And it shouldn't just be hidden and laughed off, because sometimes in that situation it is. But for sure, those two things I don't see, but those are the things that I talk about quite a lot in a lot of our kind of community sessions. The only other thing I would say is listen to authentic experiences. So when we talk about listening, it's, so what do you need from me? You said how, you know, I've listened. What do you need from me, and how can I help? Rather than assuming that your help is what they need, it's actually, what do you need and what would you like? Rather than the assumption that what you're going to go and do is exactly what they want to see or hear from you.
Yeah. Okay. Lauren, do you want to add anything else to that?
I would definitely agree with all of that. I think, I guess similar to the previous one, kind of, asking and listening and understanding is always the biggest one. I think I've been quite lucky in my workplaces that I work places that are quite understanding and are willing to listen to me and kind of take me at my word. But I have, you know, heard from all sorts of people in other situations that are far worse than that, and they've got, you know, managers or whoever who will not consistently kind of implement the adaptations that have been agreed or whatever. So I guess on that kind of smaller scale, you know, if you are around someone in that situation, kind of who might not feel the most empowered and able to speak up if they're in a workplace that doesn't take it seriously, kind of, I guess listening and offering to help if that is what that person wants, and just being supportive and raising that concern if it is there.
Yeah. And Rob, anything more that you want to put in there?
No, I think it's all been said. I think it's been said.
I think the thing for me is not underestimating the power you have as an ally, because I think I've seen this more and more recently, not in all, or the autistic or neurodiversity sense, but in other areas. Just having someone that's there to say, I've noticed this person isn't treating you quite the way that you should be treated. And instead of that person kind of just being there and thinking, I'm just going to deal with it, it's like, oh, someone else is seeing it. That means that it gives me a power to speak up. It maybe there is something going on here, rather than them just sort of sitting there and going, is this just me? Am I just, and I think that's a lot of value in that. Go on, Lauren.
I was just going to say something else. I thought of kind of along those lines is like having some kind of space to have those conversations can be really important as well. One thing that's completely shocked me since I've started talking about autism in my workplaces is the number of people that have, on the back of that, come to me and said, I've always thought there was something And now I've heard someone that I can kind of relate to in my life talk about it, I feel like I can actually engage with that and go and look at it. And there's multiple people now that have gone off and sought a diagnosis because they've been able to kind of engage with it as a result of hearing about it in their normal lives. So I think it's not just, neurotypical people being allies. I guess it's, having some space where you can have those conversations openly. Sometimes just makes people feel a bit safer in coming forward and saying, actually, there's something not quite right, or and going and supporting themselves better as well as supporting other autistic people.
And that leads on again now to another question, well, coming to the final question, really. What's one thing you would love people to know about autism? Rob, let's go to you for this one first.
I don't know. It's difficult. Okay, there is one thing. It's not necessarily disability, because immediately everybody thinks it is, and it is not. And if people continue to look through the lens of it being disability, automatically makes them treat you differently. It's good that they come up with strategies to help you in a structured way, which is fine. But if they start unconsciously creating bias, which many people do, then it's difficult. So it is not a disability.
Can I ask a question? So it's autism is a disorder. Is that how it's referred to? Because that's
it's a disorder, which basically means a negative connotation. Asperger's at least has a title, but not an affiliate second word that makes it negative.
Yeah.
But autistic spectrum disorder. I am tagged. I am marked. But I am not. I am a person.
Yeah. Natalie, what would you like to add to this?
Yeah, and I agree. I totally agree with that commentary. But the other thing I absolutely love is every person I've met is open and honest. They are who they are. There's no hidden agenda. They are they say what they mean, and I really like that. I like that in this world. I like the fact that they can't mask. They're not good at like sarcasm. It's very open and honest. They're very straightforward, very straight talking. I like it. There's no hidden agenda really. And I like that. I like that approach. I like that thought. And that's exactly how my son is. And that's how anyone who I have met that is on the spectrum is very much like that. It takes a while to get used to, but actually it's a good thing, right? It's a good thing to just be, there's nothing hidden behind him. He couldn't lie to me. He couldn't say anything other than the truth. And I actually really appreciate that.
So you know exactly where you stand, and
absolutely.
And Lauren, what would you add in?
I think I would almost say, like, I would love people to just speak to someone who is autistic and kind of see what it actually looks like. I think there's such a perception of what autism is, I guess, linking to what Rob said, that I think is quite harmful and definitely is perpetuating that kind of cycle of girls in particular, but not just girls, getting kind of going undiagnosed for years and kind of suffering as a result of that. So I don't know if that's one thing, but speak to someone, see what it looks like.
And very final question: do you have a place where people could go to find out more that you would specifically recommend? I'm going to go to Lauren first, and I particularly know that she should be recommending a particular thing, but
feels like cheating. So I, after my diagnosis, I found that there wasn't a huge amount of like practical tips that I wanted. I ended up adapting a load of stuff that was really aimed at parents and kids. So I started writing, and with some help from ex-colleagues at Gusto, have got a website now called Colour Me Autistic. So colourmeautistic.com, which is just at the moment is a collation of all of my kind of tips and reflections and things. But I'm in the process of looking for other people to kind of contribute to broaden that out as well. So that's one place.
So we'll be sharing that link, but please do go and check it out. And just reading the first blog that you did really gave me a lot of insight just from scanning through that. So it's well worth checking out.
Thanks.
Natalie, any recommendations yourself?
So as a parent, there's quite a few communities on kind of the Facebook and the social channels that I engage with to kind of talk around different experiences, and I find that really useful. There are a couple of YouTube videos as well that I think are really good, and channels that I'll have to put the links in that I look at, but also I think it's probably good for when my son grows up as well to look at. And some of them are around gaming and how gaming is really great for the online community and communications and things like that. So that's a really good channel. So yeah, those are probably the two places that I generally go to. National Autistic Society in particular. I'm a member, and community is really engaging there.
And Rob, any from you?
There's a really good website called colormeautistic.com.
I think I've heard of that.
Yeah, I agree with you. Do you want to throw any others in as well? And I'm just gonna...
it is interesting what Lauren says. So there's plenty of stuff for parents with autistic children, but there's not a lot for people who have been diagnosed with autism in later life. It's all about how parents look after kids, which is quite frustrating. So there is a gap in the market, and maybe I'll build an app.
Good idea. There was one book that I did find really helpful. There wasn't a lot, but by Christine Lyon, called Finding Your Autistic Superpower. The book isn't all actually about finding your autistic superpower, but that did have a lot of more kind of practical, concrete advice if that's what people are looking for.
That's cool. I'll also share that in the comments and stuff so people have it. So, but that's all the questions I have. I hope that everyone who's watching has enjoyed this, whether you're on live or on replay. Like I say, if you do have any follow-up questions, feel free to put them in, and I will find a way to get answers back into you from all these lovely people. So thank you very much, all three of you, to Rob, to Natalie, and to Lauren. Really appreciate you coming on. And I've learned so much from talking to you in advance, but also from just listening. And I think that's the biggest message I've taken away, is just remembering to listen, and listen from that perspective of what's really going on. And going back to the comment I made at the beginning, it's easy to listen and go, oh yeah, I struggle with presenting too, or I feel overloaded with this too. It's like, no, imagine yourself with complete overload and then having to do it all the time. That's the thing that's really hit me. So thank you all so much for coming in.